is the official kickoff of the air program fee advisory discussion. We did have a meeting back in December just as the kickoff to the kickoff to tell you we were going to have this meeting. But today is the day that we're going to really bring hopefully the nuts and bolts and the meat and potatoes to you so that you can see the work that we've been doing since last we came to you for fee stakeholder discussions back in 2014, 2015 timeframe and where we think we're going together. So we'll talk about background, funding, we'll talk about timeline, and then as I mentioned, we really want to have a good discussion and ideas and hear your comments, questions, and concerns. So just as way of background, my role is to really kind of bring you up to speed on what we do and how we do it, but I'm not going to tell you everything we do, though again, happy to answer questions. This is just a reminder of how the Air Pollution Control Program is organized, both within the Department of Natural Resources and also as reporting to the Missouri Air Conservation Commission. You can see that we have the six technical sections here in the program. All of the managers introduce themselves other than David Ofu. He's our manager of the Gateway Vehicle Inspection or GVIP program in St. Louis. That's the Vehicle Emissions Inspection Program for those of you that don't live in the area and aren't subject to that program. As I mentioned, we report to the Department of Natural Resources. Kira is my supervisor at the Division of Environmental Quality. Many of you know her. She grew up in the air program and held this position during the last round of fee stakeholder discussions. Yes, okay. Then, of course, we do also report through the Missouri Air Conservation Commission that does all of the official rulemaking and state implementation plan actions and other such type things as laid out by statute. We do also work very directly with those in public information and legal, the regional offices, and then also our partners at the Environmental Services Program. There's about 95 to 100 of us in or positions in the Air Pollution Control Program, but that's just part of the folks that do air pollution work. As you can see, we have our 5 department regional offices that currently do air pollution work, St. Louis, Kansas City, Northeast, Southeast, and Southwest. Those of you that are familiar with the Department of Natural Resources do know that we also have the field office, but they're not yet doing air pollution work. So we have the 5 regional offices that we work most closely with. Again, Environmental Services Program. And one thing that is a little different than some of the other media is we do have delegated local agencies that do air pollution work within their jurisdiction. St. Louis County, St. Louis City, Kansas City, and Springfield. They all do a little bit of different work. Some of them only really focus on asbestos work, and others do more all the way up to permitting action. The point of this slide is there's about 150 of us doing air quality work along with you all. Those of you here in the room, those that are on the phone, those that came before you, and those that are yet to come. There's a lot of people working together to make sure that air quality in Missouri is meeting federal standards. Just in case you want more information than what I just flew through, you can find more information on our webpage. You can also look, the second bullet there is a presentation that we did last year that has a lot more detail on what each of those sections do. The titles are pretty self-explanatory, but there's more work that gets done that perhaps may not be what you're thinking of. And then the last bullet there is information on the previous fee stakeholder process, all the presentations and a lot of information on how we went through together with you all back in the 2014, 15, and starting 2016 timeframe. It's all still there if you're interested. Some of the slides, if you participated in those fee stakeholder meetings back then, some of the slides today may look familiar. We've done a lot of updating to be able to bring you, again, the picture of where we are now since last we had these conversations. A little more background. I've got a lot of background slides, I'll warn you that. Our authority for the Missouri Air Conservation Law and the Air Pollution Control Program is found in Chapter 643 of the Revised Statutes of Missouri. It talks about the role of the Missouri Air Conservation Commission, the program, and how we all work together. In particular, 643.079 defines the fee stakeholder process. Very similar to the other media, it talks about having official fee stakeholder meetings and then moving on through working with the Missouri Air Conservation Commission. Part of it will be similar to the regular rulemaking process, so public hearing and public notice, but it does culminate also in a 60-day review period by the General Assembly. So a lot of procedures laid out in the statute, and so in case you wanted to take a closer look, I do have one copy if anybody wants to take a look at it today. So background on fees, just again, back in 2014, 2015, we went through a fee stakeholder process. We knew at the time, I think we all knew at the time, that the work that we did was really great to be able to think about long-term funding for the AIR program, but I don't think anybody thought that we were never going to be coming back to the table. So it's taken a little bit, but here we are in 2020 and coming back to take a look again at that statute and look at where we can go together, looking at fees and revenues and such. Just a reminder, back then in the 2014 timeframe, we worked together to raise the emission fee from where it had been capped at $40 for several years. We raised it to $48 per ton, and that was effective in 2016. Just for context, as a reminder, it was effective in 2016 for the 2015 emission fee year. So you'll see this reflected whenever we start getting to some of the financial slides. You can really see where that increase in the fee per ton hit on the revenues. Permit fees and asbestos fees were effective the following year at the beginning of 2017. That was part of an extended stakeholder process. We did the emission fee first, and then came back to the table and worked with those two other fees or sets of fees. Permit fees, just outlined real quickly. You can see that we looked at the hourly fee for construction permit review, a tiered approach for operating permits, and then filing fees for construction permits and performance. Many of you may have been subject yet to these new fees since they became effective at the beginning of 2017. Some of you may not. The operating permit does expire on a 5-year rolling basis, and so you may not have had to pay the new fees yet, or perhaps you haven't had a new construction permit, but these fees have been in place for a while. The asbestos fees were effective again beginning of 2017. We did work through the stakeholder process to increase the fees pretty much across the board for the asbestos program. One of the goals for the asbestos program at the time was for the asbestos work to pay for the asbestos work. And so I'm happy to report that it is paying for itself now. There for several years it was not, but with the fee increases, we are showing that it is paying for itself. The Gateway Vehicle Inspection Program fees, that program changed, or the existing program came into effect back in 2007, and during the previous fee stakeholder process, we did not touch the GVIP fees. We wanted to make sure that it was reflected here because it is a fee that we do collect. But I did have a couple of items I'd mention in particular about the GVIP fee. One is that if you've been following along with the Missouri Air Conservation Commission and the work that we've been doing in St. Louis, you would notice that the St. Louis area, the non-attainment area for the current ozone standard, is much smaller than it ever has been. It's now only a 3-county area rather than a 5-county area. And with that change in the non-attainment area, we were able to move through the process to submit to EPA a change to the GVIP, removing Jefferson and Franklin counties. That change has not officially come into effect yet because we're awaiting EPA to make a final determination on that. But at such time as they do approve removal of Jefferson and Franklin counties from the GVIP, that will slim the program down and, of course, necessarily impact the amount of revenue and the amount of people that are subject to that program. A couple other things about GVIP is I am aware that there is a bill moving through the Missouri legislature right now to eliminate the program from St. Charles County, which also would be a change to the program. And then the third thing is that the GVIP fund is subject to a sweep or a redirection of funds anytime that the legislature takes a look at the general revenue and determines that a sweep or a redirection is appropriate. This last happened in 2017, and it's happening again this year, which means that from January to June, all revenues from the GVIP program will be moved and redirected. So just a couple things to think about under the GVIP program. And I have more background, I promise. Not moving.
Okay. There you go.
Okay. Oh, we both
too far.
Don't read it.
You click it.
Okay.
You click it.
Okay. Okay. So one of the things we wanted to report to you, or some of the things we wanted to report to you, is what we've done since last we came and asked you for a fee increase. We have done a lot of things. I've got 3 slides. They are not all inclusive, and we're not done. But some of the things that we wanted to bring to your attention is changes that we've made to various rules. Part of this is through the red tape reduction process that we've talked a lot about. Hopefully that's not a new concept for you. But in that, we removed the basic operating permit, we've removed the open burning permits, we've eliminated our rule backlog. We still have a lot of rules to move through the process just because of the nature of the Clean Air Act and things like that. But we have made some changes to the program that hopefully you've seen reflected in how you do business with us. Monitoring network savings, I'm going to flip over to Steve Hall so you can listen to him talk for a minute because he can explain this better than I speak.
So our ambient air monitoring network is a network that has monitoring stations throughout the state. So it's it's both capital expense intensive and also operating expense intensive. The good news is ambient air concentrations have reduced and technology has improved so much over the last several years. We've been able to make some changes in the network that have helped us save resources. We used to outsource, or we used to have PM 2.5 filter weighing done in-house, and that required a clean room that was temperature controlled, humidity controlled, and it was very labor intensive to weigh all those filters. So over the past several years, we've been converting all of our filter-based PM 2.5 monitoring to a continuous-based federal equivalent method. And we were able to outsource the filter weighing requirements, and so no longer needed to maintain the in-house resources to do that task. With the assistance of our environmental services program, we've been upgrading a number of our sites where we can do this to remote automated calibration and quality control checks. And so where we may have been required to actually physically drive to a site on an every 2-week basis, we're now able to make decisions in-house about when that might be necessary and use the automated system to do that biweekly without actually having to send someone to the site. And so that's saved us significant resources. With concentrations decreasing, as you might imagine, we've been able to look at the network design requirements. At one time, we needed to have more monitors in the network to satisfy the Federal Clean Air Act ambient air monitoring requirements. So what we've done is we've done some analysis to determine what sites might be redundant, and those that were, we were able to propose in our annual monitoring network plan to remove those sites, and EPA reviewed that analysis and it has approved several sites to have been discontinued over the last several years. And we're doing work planning for equipment replacements. Our environmental services program every year works with our ambient air monitoring unit, and they pick which equipment we think is going to fail the soonest, and we start planning that replacement in that fiscal year. We also do a 5-year look down the road. What equipment do we think we're going to have to replace coming up? And that gives us some time to think about how we might, potentially look for some federal funding where we can for some of that equipment. It just lets us know what's coming down the road. So this has helped us make good decisions on how we're using our capital money for equipment replacements. And there are some filter-based sampling that we still do, lead specifically, where we had sampling done on a more frequent basis than is required today. And so we've made reductions where we can in the sample frequency realm. The other area that we've discontinued is the evaluation of certain federal area source rules for hazardous air pollutants for which the program has not accepted the delegation of the enforcement authority for those standards. The reciprocating internal combustion engine area source standard, the RICE rule that some of you are familiar with, although you may have to identify it in a Title V operating permit, the state is not conducting, a regular enforcement program for that. And And before, when these rules first came out, we had staff trying to inventory how many of these sources we had. The area source, boiler back was another one that may have increased the amount of sources we had to regulate, probably in the 800 to 1,000 facility range. We began to realize early on that this was not something we could take on with the existing resources. And so we basically went from assisting those folks with help on those area source standards to letting them know who at EPA is the one doing the enforcement on those standards. And so I think with that, Darcy, that concludes my area.
Awesome. Thank you.
Try it again.
Okay. So some other things that we've done with the reorganization of state government last year, we did do some shifting of physical space in the program. We have new neighbors. So if you come in to do a sunshine request or meet with us, you'll notice that we have new folks on the half of the 1659 East Elm that we inhabit. So that's going to help us with rent and different things. We're doing our best to really be thinking long-term on electronic storage, both so that we can serve you and assist you better. So we get your paperwork and we can do things electronically and pass drafts and such back, but also so that whenever we send things to the file room, we can send them electronically so we can get them back faster and we don't have to wait for turnaround for getting boxes and such back. We've got a long way to go, but we've made a lot of great progress in that. And the hope, again, is that long-term planning so that what we're doing today and how we're scanning and things like that will be long-term accessible to everyone. And just some other things. We've looked at copiers and printers, and we're looking big and we're looking little, just streamlining across the board how we can do what we're doing today better tomorrow. We're looking really at just essentials for travel and office supplies, and we send people when they need to go, but we're not sending a bunch of people to something that they could get here or that something we could send one person and bring back that knowledge. We're trying to reduce spending where we can. We're not doing a lot of printing and sending a lot of people on overnight whenever a day trip works. And we're really scrutinizing every single vacancy as we fill them. If you pay attention or attend Missouri Air Conservation Commission meetings, try and keep the commission updated generally on how many vacancies we have. I've heard Kira say before, when she started in the air program 20 years ago, we had about 120 positions, and now we're down to between 95 and 100 moving forward. So we're trying to be very thoughtful, filling the positions that we need, but not filling the position just because that's what we've always done. We want to think about those job duties and think about what needs to happen. We're continuing to look for savings. Many of you work perhaps in other states or you work in other media. So if you have ideas, if you have things that you see us doing that we don't even realize could be more efficient or something totally out of the box, I'd encourage you to tell us, because we can't get better all on our own, but we can get better taking a look whenever we have partners such as yourself. So here's background on air quality. So I don't know, we're about 30 minutes in and we're going to talk about air quality, which is why we're all here, right? So this is a beautiful slide. I know you may not be able to see all the numbers, so I'm going to orient you to it a little bit here. We start on the left with the 1996 to 1998 design values for St. Louis in blue, the blue line, Kansas City in green, the middle downward trending line, and then rural or outstate in purple, which is the bottom line. So on the left, 1996 to 1998. On the far right, 2017 to 2019, which is the most recent, not quality assured, preliminary data for ozone. And then you can see three different ozone standards. The top line, pink at 87, is the 1997 standard for ozone. The middle line, orange, 75, is the 2008 ozone standard, and then the bottom red line is the 2015 ozone standard. So you can see over time how air quality has improved just looking at ozone, just looking at the design values for these three, or the aggregate design values for these three areas. But you can see that beautiful line as it goes down. You can see we've had some peaks, we've had some valleys. And you can also see that St. Louis is still non-attainment for the 2015 ozone standard. So we've done great work together with you all and our partners outside local agencies and planning organizations and things like that. We do still have work to do. St. Louis at 71, preliminary not quality assured, last year's data. Kansas City 68 and rural at 59. So a lot of great work, but as you know, in the AIR program, we also charge emission fees. So you see, this isn't as many years, but you can see on this slide that as air quality, those numbers, design values, aggregate data has gone down as an improvement in air quality. You can see the partner as the chargeable emissions have reduced, as have the revenues. So we'll walk you through this. On the left are the chargeable emissions in blue, and you can see the downward trending line from 215,000-ish tons back in 2010 down to 2018, about 140,000 tons. And then the corresponding fee line that goes from about 8.6 million in 2010 down to about 6.7 million in 2018. 2010 to 2014 shows the emission fee there that was capped at $40 per ton, and then 2015 to 18 shows it at $48 per ton. Again, the fees were raised, the emission fee was raised January 1 of 2016 for the 2015 emission year. So that's why you see that uptick there in 2015. Here's another trend line. You can see this one, we are switching the years up on you a little bit, but you can see this one goes back to 1999. And the reason for that is so you can see how the state and federal emission fees have changed over time. So back in 1999, we were at $25.70. It went up, it went a little bit back down, and then was finally ultimately capped at $40 per ton in 2008, where it lived until we went through the fee stakeholder process. Again, raised in 2016 for the 2015 emission year. So you can see the $48 per ton starting in 2015. The interesting thing on this slide in particular for me is you can see the blue line, which is the EPA emission fee. So that's if EPA were implementing the program or where EPA is implementing the program, whether that's in a tribal land or another state, you can see how EPA's emission fee has trended upwards. And that's actually set, it was set, I believe, in 1990 at $25 per ton. I'm not looking at my notes very clearly, but that $25 per ton, and then raised every year per the consumer price index. So you see on our slide here, it's gone from $33.82 up to $52.03 for 2019. We put this here, it's not necessarily background on Missouri, but it's just background information to consider about what other states are doing. Other states are, I had this conversation right before the meeting. It's in some ways apples and oranges to what we do. Not everybody does things exactly the same as we do, but you can take a look and see how other states do it. These do vary by permit type. They could vary based on industry or type of permit. In some situations, smaller emitters pay less or nothing. But we did find three that, from our opinion, are similar to Missouri. You guys can disagree. You can give us more information. But just for a point of reference, Iowa and Nebraska is about $70 per ton, and Kansas at $53. There are some unique fee structures. Some of them, I believe the first bullet is Illinois, where folks pay on allowable emissions rather than actual. Some, I can't remember what state that one is, but pay higher of industry type inspection fee or emission fee, so they pay one or the other. Some vary fee by the type of pollutant it is. Some set the funding amount needed to operate the program and then just divide it by the number of tons to figure out what the fee is. So there's lots of different ways to approach this issue, but we just wanted to demonstrate we've done our homework, but there's things we're not aware of to research. And if you have ideas, we would like to know so we can do some additional research. Here's another slide or perspective that we like to bring to everybody's attention. You can see, just looking at 2018, the number, or the percentage rather, of facilities by permit type. So the Title V facilities are about 21% of our universe. So we generally think of those as being the larger type of facilities, electric generating units or cement, things like that. Those 21% pay about 94.97 of the emission fees. So it's just that perspective of how our universe is divided up. Oh, and against these.
There you go.
So what we want to talk to you all about today is long-term funding viability. We're celebrating the wins where our air quality is markedly improved from where we've been in the past. Smallest non-attainment area for ozone. We do have a couple SO2 and lead areas that we're continuing to work on. But as air quality improves, the revenues from emission fees decrease as well. We've done a lot of reduction in workload, both reduction of actual workload and then making the workload be more efficient, but these things aren't reducing proportionally. And as Deidre will mention, we do expect, of course, expenditures to increase as we move forward. I'm going to pause if anybody has any questions or ideas or even homework that we can do before I turn it over to Deidre. Does anybody have anything?
No question. They say there are no dumb questions, but I've been proven wrong before.
No dumb questions.
You said 21% of the Title V facilities pay almost 95% of the emissions fees.
Mm-hmm.
When you use the word emissions fees, is that different than fees for operating permit, all that? I mean, or are you just lumping everything together?
I think that's for emission fees.
That's just the emissions fees. But
right.
How much of your budget is paid for by all the other?
Did we plant you in the crowd? Because that's, I think, what Deidre is going to get at.
So I guess it wasn't a dumb question.
That's not a dumb question. That's really the crux of who and what and how. So, yeah, good question.
We got lots of different ways to look at it.
Yep, pies and pizzas and sandwiches and all that.
Sure. Okay. I already have them out of order. This is a real quick way of looking at the operating expenditures. We exclude pass-through, which is grant, and we're talking all fund sources from fiscal year 13, which was where we committed to you that we were going to reduce our program expenditures wherever we could. And you can see there was a huge drop to 14, roughly to the tune of about $1 million. And it has remained consistent pretty much through fiscal year 19. This is just expenditures we're looking at. We're going to talk about revenue. A large part of us being fiscally responsible is thoughtfully projecting future revenue. We reviewed a list of the largest fee payers and projected future emissions based on one or more of the following factors: historical 5-year trends, any in-house pending projects that we were aware of, any input that we got from facilities, and also any future federal regulations we believe will affect emissions. So that brings us to an annualized revenue assumption. Consider we're talking about the projected 5-year period, fiscal year 2023 through fiscal year 2027. It's an average, and it's all funds. The federal permanent asbestos and GVIP projections are held constant, and we included emission fee revenues at the current rate, which is $48 a ton. So fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 22, we're relatively stable, sustainable. Fiscal year 23 and 24, we are predicting a reduction in the amount of fees. Even as these are our best projections, you have to keep in mind that it's an estimate. And so for fiscal year 24 and beyond, we're going to say further reductions are unknown. Okay, this is a cool chart. You like it? Okay, I said before, all the future revenue and expenditures are projected for fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 27. And for those of you not familiar with the state fiscal year, it starts July the 1st and goes through the next calendar year, June 30th. Okay, so here on this chart, we have actual years, fiscal year 16 through fiscal year 19. And they're displayed next to the projected years, fiscal year 20 through fiscal year 27. Revenue types are broke out by the types of fees, and you can see the key for that over on the right. Just looking at this, projected revenues are overall steady. GVIP fees, this is something that sticks out in this. You can see the years that we had the sweep, 2017 and then 2020. And Darcy explained that a little bit earlier, the redirection of revenue. Future projection years assume no sweep. So you can see from 21 to 27, it's held relatively constant. We aren't able to predict thoughtfully what we think might happen with state revenue. We can only talk about the AIR program, and that's where the redirection comes from. We may need to come back and visit those areas, the GVIP fees and possibly asbestos at some time if their shortfall becomes greater. Let's see, one of the things that I think kind of really shows itself between fiscal year and fiscal year 16 and fiscal year 17, you can see the light blue area, Title V fees decreased. And with emissions across the state and the large facilities, you would ask yourself, how did that decrease? And what happened was there were two facilities, Kansas City Power and Light Sibley and Montrose, that switched from Title V fees to non-title fees after they changed their fuel sources. So instead of burning nasty coal, they moved to gas. And also impacts from rule changes on other facilities have a slight effect on that too, but I think you can see it very clearly that in the out years, revenue is projected to be about the same. And you can see the sweep years, what it does to the fund balances. And I also wanted to be able to explain why there was such a huge change from 16 to 17. Okay, now looking at revenues, again, excluding the pass-through, we show estimated revenue for a 5-year average, fiscal year 23 through 27. Oh, they can't see that. Oh, that's okay. I'm sorry. We didn't realize.
Let me see if I can type.
Yeah, okay. I didn't realize you couldn't see that number. This pie chart is a good visual representation of where the AIR program's funding comes from. It's easy to recognize on this slide that fees, the light blue area, and then the non-title, Title V fees, and then the Title V fees in the light blue and the non-Title V fees in the darker blue account for about half of what the program's revenue is. Average revenue for the out years, the 23 through 27, all funds, total $12.4 million. Okay. Now we're going to look at the operating expenditures estimated.
There you go. Okay. Okay, sorry. Let me hit it. Sorry, I could close out of that. Okay, now you can forward.
You say Title V, Title V source,
Yes.
and that's all permanent fees.
Okay, when we saw a bar chart like this, when we were talking about revenue, here we reveal the operating expenditures and the key on the right indicates the type of expenditure activity, and it correlates with the revenue. GBIP, asbestos, Title V, non-Title V, et cetera. On the left are the dollar figures. You have actual years 16 through 19, and then the projected years 20 through 27. Certain things on this slide stand out. You can see that fiscal year 19, are you going to draw on that one?
Sorry.
Fiscal year 19 had a high number of vacancies. I'm not sure what occurred that year that caused so many vacancies in the permits department. We'd like to blame it on Kendall, but he is a nice guy.
He is a nice guy.
And you can also see from this that operating expenditures show a slight increase for projected years, just like a steady increase. The pay plan increase of the current fiscal year, and I'm going to give you details on those pay plan assumptions in the next slide. And the pay plan increase of the current year and the out years is the projections of the cost to hire, train, and retain staff. This includes staff we already have. The associated increases in state employee benefits, retirement, and health insurance account for almost half of the increase. Okay, now we will look at the new projected pay plan. Again, there's stuff on the bottom.
I can't get rid of those. I'll type it in.
Okay, current administration is recommending for all DNR employees pay plan annual increase for fiscal year 21 at 3%. That's already approved. Okay. Fiscal year 22 and forward utilize a 3.5% increase for salaries and a 1% annual growth of the fringe rate, which is capped at 62%. The newly proposed above and beyond reward system is included in this with legislative approval, appropriations, and approved budget. Okay. This is a simplified visual representation of the projected annual expenditures for the 5-year average, the fiscal year 23 through 27. Notice here, operating E&E is already slim. The light blue, is that what it shows up there? Gray.
Yeah, I'll draw a line to it. Yep.
It's already a slim part of that pie. It includes the cost of the air monitoring networks across the state. Office equipment and supplies are in this. The blue area is our portion of costs allocated among the programs and includes DNR administration, OAITSD, which is computer equipment and staff, and also it has rent and utilities for our office spaces. Fringe and personal service are personnel costs. These are what we consider our intellectual resources. So light green and peach, or light green and gray, light green and tan. How about green and tan?
Upside down.
The Pac-Man.
We need to keep the people that we already have hired today because the institutional knowledge we have found is irreplaceable. This shows expenditures estimated at $16.6 million. Comparing this information to the previous slides we've shown with our best estimates of revenue, there is a gap, and it's called the shortfall. That's highlighted on there? It's not. Okay. We've explained where the numbers are coming from, and although possible shortfalls exist for asbestos and GBIP fee funds in out years, at the present time we're addressing the Title V and non-Title V fee fund shortfall. With revenues at 12.4 million that we showed and expenditures at 16.6, we're estimating an annual average shortfall of 4.2 million. The majority of that being Title V. This is an even simpler way to look at it. Even if I wasn't giving you all these numbers and all these statistics and all these quotes, if you were looking at this chart, the orange bars represent projected future revenue and the blue bars are future expenditures. You can see the difference between those lines. The shortfall for the out years, fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 27 are shown at the bottom under their respective year.
One more try. There you go.
What was that last year? When it went up each year, what was the amount of the last one? That's FY 27.
What, excuse me, what went up?
Fiscal year 27, the last bar to the right, what's that number of it?
5,151,560. Those 5 years, the average of those is the 4.2.
Fiscal year 23, it starts off with
3.1. I know you're going to say you want to see by activity how the program spends their money, the funds. Title V activities, and the examples of those are like reviewing and permitting the Title V facilities, compliance and enforcement of the Title V facilities, and emissions inventory. The light blue area is half. To show you visually the shortfalls in that same pie, the next slide shows the shortfalls for each type of activity set out in gray and outlined in red. I wasn't sure if it showed up red or orange. Those bumped out areas show, thank you, Stacy. For Title V emission fees, that's the shortfall. For that bumped out area, the shortfall for non-Title V fees. Shortfall for asbestos and GBIP fees are also included on there. Okay, I feel like I gave you a lot of numbers. And you don't remember what I said. But when all projections are made and tabulated, very simply broken down, this is the result. Removing the detail of the different types of revenues and expenses, with expenditures being represented in the blue shaded area in the background. It's not blue there.
And a gray.
The shaded area in the background. And revenue shown with actual and projected amounts on the gray bars.
I can't see that. Okay.
Okay.
Give me a second. Get some color. Oh, there. Oh, man. Sorry.
That's okay. Shaded area being expenditures and the bars representing the revenue. And the green line is the fee fund balance. From fiscal year 19 out years, you can see we're going to reach our fiscal cliff, which is where our fund balance drops below zero, or the minimum amount that we need to maintain solvency. If we don't complete the fee process this year, we will be insolvent once the fund balance goes to zero in year 23. Any questions on that information? I think if you have a chance to study, rather than listen to how I was saying the things, if you can just simply look at the facts that are presented on the slide, it culminates in this final one right here that without a fee increase, with known factors that have been thoughtfully considered, we will become insolvent.
Dorothy just do everything by herself. Then all this is over.
Thank you for your support. I'm not sure about that.
I have no question.
Yeah.
Are all these slides currently on the website?
So they will be on the website. They are posted in the WebEx right now. We just need to get them posted on the webpage. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of information. We considered handouts, but we just weren't sure, so.
No,
Yeah.
the website's perfect.
Yeah. Yep. We have more.
I'll give you Kindle too. You need Kindle?
Oh, maybe Steve. If you got that, I've got some oceanfront property on. Okay.
Darcy, I had to step out to take a call.
Yes, sir.
What was the reason that you go kind of flatline over to 2019 and then it drops off? What's the reason for that?
So that's when we start to catch up with our expenditures raising and our revenues not, our projected revenues not meeting them. That's when we really start to see it. We can go back if you want.
No,
Yeah,
don't punish everybody else, please.
We can walk you through it.
Are you saying that was a punishment?
Maybe twice.
No, twice would be.
I've done it a lot, so.
So like, when we take it to the woodshed or something later.
Okay. Maybe not. Okay. All right. Oh, I think it's me to click.
Go ahead. Sorry. So switching over to me, as Deidre mentioned in her last slide, the chart shows that the fund balance for the AIR program will go to zero. Can you hear me better? Sorry. As the chart shows, the fund balance will go to zero in fiscal year 2023. And fiscal year 2023 actually starts in July of 2022. So keeping that in mind, what we've done in these next few slides is we've built a tentative schedule. As you can see, today we have come to you with some information about the fee stakeholder process. We know we've been giving you a lot of information. We anticipate that there are going to be more discussions. So what we've done is we have set up a couple of dates tentatively right now for logistical reasons. We have reserved this room for April 6th and May 5th. But these dates are open for discussions. If there are additional dates that you would like to see, we're here to hear your feedback. Or if you would like a conference call to be set up because you don't want to come to Jefferson City, you want to hear more information maybe over the phone, or we can also set up a webinar, kind of what we're doing here with Stacy. We can just do a webinar completely so that we don't have to have a room set up. There's also different ways of getting the information out to you. The first email blast that we sent out was through GovDelivery or through email, but we are open to any different ways that you are interested in getting the information. Like we said, we'll be posting the presentation on our webpage, and so that'll give you some time to look at the information at your leisure and then get back with us with questions. So on the next slide, I have the tentative schedule here. So that first bullet, of course, we're here at the stakeholder process. This is our first meeting, and like I said, we have tentative meeting dates that go out until May. So if we need more or less, we can change that. Sticking with that schedule, once we come to an agreement on the fee schedule, we will bring it to the commission, our Missouri Air Conservation Commission, for review and approval, and we're looking at an April to July kind of time frame for that information to go to the commission. Once that is approved, we will move into the formal rulemaking process, because whatever fee increase or a fee change that we make will have to be done in a rule, and we would start the rulemaking process at that time. We would be looking at a public hearing in the August to October timeframe, so that we would file the proposed or the order of rulemaking with JCAR by December 1st of 2020, and that is a requirement, a statutory requirement, in order to give the legislature time to review the proposed fee schedule around January to March 2021 timeframe. And then on this schedule, what we would do is we would collect the fees by June 1st of 2022. On this next slide, you can see where it's kind of a visual interpretation of the time schedule. So the emission year is actually 2021, and then we will collect the fees in 2022. And the due date for that would be June 1st of 2022. So that would meet our, the deadline that we had kind of seen in that first chart where the fiscal cliff shows up in fiscal year 2023. So with that, I think we are open for discussion.
So we have more slides, but we thought you guys may have ideas, comments, questions, input. Do you have some, Lacey?
Well, I guess you do have more slides, but are we going to see a projected fee increase today for us to look at or an ask today?
So we have some ideas that we thought you all might have. So we've got a couple reminder slides of reminder, here's where we're at, but we've looked at EPA's fee. We've looked at looking at the cap. We've looked at different things. And we actually have two really fancy calculators that I don't know that we'll get to them today, but we have them, and we were going to share those so that you could really play around, because there's lots of ways to look at this.
Do you share them on the website?
I think, yeah, I don't know if we can share it on the web page because it's an interactive tool. It may have to be something you would email, but yeah.
We'll look into that.
In the fall, and then here would get the calculator.
However, I mean, however you guys want to approach this, yeah.
And then I just, maybe next time having the slides, either before, printed out would probably be.
Yes, great. Agreed. Well, we considered, again, printing them, but we weren't sure what the group would want, but yeah. Noted. Printing cost money, and so we wanted to save money. We did have them, and I guarantee you they were working on it at 8 o'clock this morning. So. I think the last change was at 11:30, but, you know, but yes, noted. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I mean, we have a couple more meetings tentatively scheduled, but it's really what the group needs. I mean, December 1 is set by statute, so if we're going to make this year, we don't have all year to do it, but we don't want to be taking up more time than folks need. But yeah, noted, for sure.
I just want to jump in here, sorry. For the sake of the people on the participating online, it's really important that they can't hear you unless you're actually talking into a microphone. I know that we don't all like to talk into the microphone, but it is important for everybody participating online. So if you don't have one in front of you, I can give you this one. Thank you.
Morgan?
Can we go back to slide 18? And I'm guessing here, my eyes can't, I know you guys have them numbered, but my eyes just can't see that far anymore.
18. I'm going to go fast.
28. 26. 26.
Yes.
22, 21, 20, 19, 18.
It was the slide where you said you guys held the revenues the same for asbestos.
Okay.
Forward.
You're close. Somewhere right in there. Yes.
Okay.
So, I'm assuming in the next slide you're saying that all federal permit asbestos and GVIP projects are held constant. Mm-hmm. Can you clarify that? Is that the number of projects?
So these are the projections for the dollars to be received.
For the dollars. So you're saying those four categories are staying the same. Okay, can we go to the next slide then? So those categories that you list, those dollar amounts are the same through the year. And the one section that has gone down is the Title V, which you guys mentioned was you had two companies that switched fuel sources and went from Title V to non-Title V. That's correct. And that's the primary driver behind the looming shortfall is the Title V fees. I just want to make sure I've got it right.
Right.
Okay. Go to the governor's pay plan slide. Okay. Having lived in Jeff City and having worked for state government, state workers in Missouri are like the worst paid in the entire nation. For everybody else that doesn't know that, I just want to throw that out to clarify. My question is that the governor's pay plan, if that goes to the legislature, doesn't the pay plan come out of GR, or are they somehow tapping revenues? So the pay plan should be insignificant in the discussion about permit fees, unless I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, tell me.
I'll take this one. At division level, and our budget staff may jump in, but this is a slightly different, and it's also hard for us to talk to the legislators about, because we, as a division of environmental quality, get very little of general revenue. We have to pay our employees whatever the governor's pay plan is, and we want to, but we don't get any additional funding for that. So the pay plan...
Because they're not GR funded right now, so no matter what the governor does over here in left field, no matter what the legislature does, they're still not really accounting for the fact that you have employees that are not GR funded, and you can't sit there and give one employee one raise and another one to not, just because of their funding source.
Right,
okay.
Right. We currently are not getting any increased money from the legislature or the governor's office to address the pay plan. It is up to the department to come up with that money through our regular fees. So, budget staff, anything else I need to add? Okay. Okay.
Good question. Thank you.
I have a question. Could you go back to the sources of revenue? And the only question I have on the sources of revenues, I mean, we've talked about a lot of that Title V, but are there any other of those revenue sources that are at risk for being in decline? I mean, I know it has waste. There's a lot of federal funds that, you know, will be a shortfall on apparently. At least that's how it's been projected.
The 105 PPG has remained fairly constant for the last 15 years.
That's our federal grant.
Okay.
We're assuming, but obviously they have budget issues as well, so.
Okay, I didn't know if you were projecting for that, or are you just assuming those are relatively the same?
Relatively the
going
same.
forward? And whatever you call GVIP fees, is that going to be constant too, as far as you know, or?
So that's the one that is subject to a biennial. That one is subject to periodic sweeps, so you can see in 17 and 20, we will have the sweep, and then with pending changes to the program with removing Jefferson and Franklin County and potentially St. Charles County, and then also the sweep, it is uncertain. We're holding it constant just because it's not something that we really feel like we can project at this point, but we are being very thoughtful and frugal in filling positions.
Hey, can you explain sweep again? I mean, you're just talking about where's it going? Who's taking it?
So,
General revenue.
yeah, I mean,
The General Assembly's taking it?
so I don't use the wrong terminology.
Okay, Lisa Sturkin, Budget Program. So in statute, it says if general revenue did not increase by 2% or more, then they may sweep the future 6 months' revenue into general revenue.
Just from that program?
Just from this fund, right?
Yes.
Remember years ago, they a couple of times, different times, the General Assembly swept the interest from the fund too? Is that, I'm sure you're not counting on that to happen again. But.
Well, as you probably remember, Roger, and I know some of you do, that's one of the reasons the payment of the fees, the date has moved. So we don't accept payment or don't expect payment of fees until June 1st when the budget for the next fiscal year has been decided. We used to get fees in much earlier, so we would have large fund balances. And it was difficult to explain to the General Assembly, we may have $5 million, $10 million in this fund, but it has to fund us for the next year.
So we pushed off getting the revenue until June 1st. So it's easier that we don't have to explain that. But yes, we did lose some interest in some funds back probably in the 90s, early 2000s.
I'm just curious, I mean, but in terms of your calculations for now, you're assuming generally business as usual on most of these, I guess.
We are, and one of the pie chart that shows the different sources of revenue kind of explains why. I mean, we could guess till we're blue in the face. The emission fees from Gateway Vehicle Inspection Program, they're going to change and they're going to affect us. And if the legislature does away with them in St. Charles County, that could affect us. But we didn't want to assume that. And as you see here, the biggest bulk of the fees that the program uses to operate is the emission fee, the $1 per ton. That is what we feel, to use the biggest bang for the buck. That's kind of what we thought would be the most appropriate to talk about. If we haven't said it, we probably will say it. If something happens with GVIP, the inspection program, we'll probably have to come back to you. That doesn't just fund those 7 staff in St. Louis. It funds a lot of the air program's work in the St. Louis area. We are able to utilize those program funds for any work done in the St. Louis area, the monitors that monitor ozone, et cetera. So if that fund drops, and even though it's just $2 million, if $2 million goes away or goes down to $1 million, that affects what we're able to do with our resources in that area. But for now, we did assume everything else would stay constant. Is that a realistic? It's optimistic, probably, but without any better information, that's what we decided to go with. So.
Thank you.
On that same topic there, you had the trend line going down for your emissions. Have you continued that trend line down in your revenue projections?
No, we actually stopped it at some point. It's in the notes on that slide.
Right. So we project out as best as we can. So we look at the last 5 years or so. We look at what you all have applied for permits for, or maybe you haven't built yet, but you have a permit, what we have in-house. We look at what's coming down the pike. The 2010 SO2 NAAQS was a big change to how many people operated. So we saw that coming for a long time. We're still rolling that in, right? And so we do our best. But at some point we say, well, we're, this is as far out as we can project. And so I think that we do hold it constant.
Okay, so
yeah.
So if emissions continue to fall, then you're still looking at another budget shortfall there. Right,
and emissions can fall for a variety of reasons, right? I mean, people can voluntarily do some changes at their plants. It could be something that we wouldn't have seen coming, so. Yep.
Hey, Darcy, I have a couple questions.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
So first question is, so the quantities that we receive that are part of our emission fees, how often are those reviewed based on the EIQ? So we submit those. Do those get updated every year with EIQ? How often does the department review those numbers?
Can you explain your question a little bit better?
So when you get a bill, an invoice, it tells you how many pounds of pollution you're being billed for. My question is, how often is that number updated? How often does the department review that? Is it every year?
We do an annual review of the annual emissions inventory questionnaire data. Now, we're not scrubbing all 2,100 EIQs, but there is a top-down quality assurance protocol that's done by Nathan O'Neill's group in the emissions inventory unit. So, I think it's going to depend a little bit on what type of facility you are. If you're, a major source, if you're having the stack testing done, there's a good chance that there's going to be some scrutiny on, numbers you may be using that stack test for to determine your annual emissions. I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, but
I think the Part 70s and the Title 5s do an EIQ every year, a full run.
The intermediate sources do one full one every 3 years. So the in-between years, they're paying off their last full EIQ. Then those sources that do not have an operating permit, there's some things in the regs that if you change by more than 6 tons or something, you're supposed to do a full one, but for the most part, they're paying off the last full EIQ.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
So my question is really, how often do you all review these fees, the invoices you send us to match what we send you in terms of pollution found? In other words, is it real? I mean, is it current?
Well, it's as real as the facilities sign off on if they're meeting the criteria Kendall mentioned. If your facility is not changing by more than 5 tons emissions per year, there's no reason to review it by rule. So if you do have a permit action, you would need to do a full EIQ. Usually it'll be the year you construct or the year after you construct. It just depends on the timing of that. And so that would be a time where a facility that might not have done a full EIQ for several years would have the opportunity to re-up those emissions. But it is the responsibility of the facilities to report their annual emissions, even if they're just reporting our emissions haven't changed by the criteria required in the EIQ rule. So I hope that helps answer that question a little bit.
And my next question is...
And I'm sorry, Jay, can I follow up?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking or why you're asking. Do you think there's undercounting of emissions or overcounting or?
Either way.
Okay.
I mean, let's just say on other programs, when you look at what your revenue is going to be, you look, if you're the sewer company, you look at how much water people are using. And so I would think it would be, you want to make sure you have an accurate accounting of how much water people are using. Same thing, I would think we'd want an accurate accounting of what the total tonnage of emissions is. And that's based on the EIQ. And my question is, some programs, they don't update. I mean, there are some programs, don't mean to throw anybody in the bus, but the water program they can't tell you how many times they review the number of connections to the system, and our connection fees are based on connections. So my question is, for the air program, we're being billed based on tonnages. Are you confident that the numbers that we're being billed on are accurate?
Jay, I'm going to jump in and try to answer this one, because I think we've been whispering back and forth trying to understand, making sure we're answering your question too. I think your quality assurance checks, quality control checks, that's what you're asking. We do those and pick sources that we do quality checks for. If you remember the slide that 95, I'm going to round, 95% of the emission fees come from 21% of the facilities. These are the large fee payers. Many are in this room. So I would say that we're fairly confident because those large fee payers are probably scrutinizing their emissions to make sure that they don't, I'm sorry, I'm trying not to look at anyone, you just happen to be sitting right across from me, Michael. Because we are a little different, the air program, I still say we, I was in the air program for 18 years, so it's hard for me to embrace the division. I apologize to everyone not in the air program. But the air program is a little different because the volume of their fees, this 95%, really we say 21%, it's really about 12 facilities that pay a big chunk of that. So those facilities we kind of rely on to self-report accurately. And I would assume that those large facilities are doing a lot of quality checks on their own, so they don't have to pay as much money. So it's kind of they're doing quality checks, and then we do some quality checks. We have some cross-checks that, when there's new permitting actions, we verify the permit information from the new equipment is now reported on their EIQ. Does that help? Okay. Yeah.
And then can I go with my question? Okay, can you go to that chart that overtime expenditures by program?
Go ahead.
I don't. Expenditures by program.
See if I can, revenue.
By activity, you mean?
Right, so I think what you were saying is that the expenditure program, the reason that's going up incremental year after year primarily is because of personal services. So about 2/3 of your fees are due to personal services. Those are going to be increased for the governor's pay plan. So that's what.
Right.
Okay.
That's correct. Right.
Is that like yoga and free lunch seminars?
That takes effect in 2028.
Okay.
No.
Personal services.
Good question.
I thought we could ask if anybody on the phone wanted to give in a question now.
I'm going to try and unmute all the lines. This might take a second.
Sorry, Stacy, I didn't know you.
That's okay. We were having a lot of feedback on the phone, so I had to mute just about everybody. So let me unmute everyone. Apologies if there's really bad feedback on the phone lines, but if you do have a question, now's the time to speak up into your phone line or type it into the chat box. I'm watching the chat box. Anybody? You want me to call on someone?
I have a question. So Roger asked at the beginning of this where the markers were for permit fees versus emission fees, and I don't know that I saw that in the slides.
Right.
Can you give us percentages, numbers? What are people paying for permits versus what are they paying in emissions fees? And then, you know, where in the program, right, how does that compare to, for instance, Kendall's group, permit fees cover Kendall's expenditures? They're just general questions about how.
We had some of those pie charts in a couple of the drafts, but we had about 25 pie charts. So we, while they're looking, they may have the numbers there if anyone remembers off the top of their head. But if we go to the where it breaks down the emission fees, we do all fees collected for permits get put into the same fund that we call the emission fees get put into. So that Title V and non-Title V is one fund, but it includes the emission fees and the permit fees for Title V and the emission fees and permit fees for non-Title V. It is a small sliver. I don't know, did anyone find the draft on the sliver?
I don't have the draft.
We can share it after. That'll be in some of the materials.
Yeah, I think so. The 5.5 million, if I'm remembering right, it's less than 300,000, I think. I mean, it's a very small number compared to the emission fees. So permit fees, you have your filing fee, which is $250, and then you have $75 hour. Most permits are anywhere from a couple $100 to $1,000, $1,500. So it's not a large chunk of money in comparison to the emission fee. I'm visualizing it. I don't remember the exact number, but we can get that and we can add that to the presentation when we post it.
Yeah, I just don't have any perspective, right?
Right.
I guess I came in here with the preconceived notion that emissions are going down, and that's part of the problem with the fee structure. Is that still an accurate statement? I see where we realigned from Title V to non-Title V as a significant change, but then it seemed like the Title V fees, as projected, remain pretty much the same. Are we not expecting a significant reduction in actual emissions in the future? That's my question.
Right. The dollars that, I don't know if we can get back to that slide.
Which one?
No, I don't think that's what he's talking about.
Do we anticipate a significant, have you built into your projections, any significant reduction in actual emissions on which fees, whether 48 per ton or some other tonnage, some other dollars per ton, have you projected a reduction in this forecast Or are we thinking the emissions are going to stay basically unchanged over the next several years?
We're showing about an 8% reduction through fiscal year 24, and then beyond that, 25 through 27, which is the period that we're looking at. We're not anticipating any further reductions, but that figure has to remain somewhat unknown. We have facts and figures that can support the 6% and the 2% that we show in 23 and 24. Mm-hmm. So we're taking where we are right now overall, an 8% decrease, and then we're holding that steady.
Based on, again, what we know and what we don't know, right? I mean, the 22 and SO2 NACs was a good example where we could say, okay, starting January 1 of 2017, this is going to happen, and as it progresses. But we're getting out of our realm there with uncertainty at the federal level and things like that.
I made the same argument in the waste meeting. I understand that the administration of this program does not correlate exactly with the total tonnage of emissions. I do think, however, it is a necessary step to show why that is true. Right. That, you know, just with the waste program as with the air program. I get it that you can't proportionally reduce your staff as emissions go down. I get that, and I agree with that. That's not true. But I think some level of detail to show why that's true is beholding on you to help us accept any changes in the funding.
Yep, understood.
So Mike and Roger, the internet is a wonderful thing, and even though the original 2014 fee presentation, the link is broken, we will fix that before you go search for it. I did find a fee presentation from 2015 that for our emission fees shows that, and the numbers are roughly the same, the permit fees portion was 2%. So it was $255,000, and that was both Title V and non-Title V permit fees. So that was permit fees collected in 2015. So 2%.
Right. So before the fee increases came about, right? Yeah, they would still be in that ballpark, right? But we'll get the details about. The internet is a beautiful, wonderful thing. But
and the internet is great because we also have a question from the chat box. So thanks to Jeff Burkett for the question. Has any consideration been given about industry expansion and new sources in Missouri related to growth in the economy?
So to the best that we know, that we do include that type of information as folks come to us for a permit, if we feel confident enough that we have enough details to put them into our projection, we will. But in many cases, you know, there's a lot out there we probably don't know. So if there's something you think that we should know, we'll throw it into the calculator. But yes, good question. Yes, sir. Robert.
I think Morgan was talking about the pay of state employees, and that's something that's troubled me for a long time. Because I've been a state employee and I've been around you guys for 25 years. And it pains me that you guys haven't got the raises that you deserve. And maybe it's always been this way, but I guess a separate and apart from raises is something that I don't really understand very well, is how employees are classified. Mm-hmm. They're somehow classified into some low salary range, which is probably way lower than the market value for those type of jobs. Mm-hmm. I would like to see at the next stakeholder meeting a presentation of all of the jobs, and within, you know, maybe not all, but clump jobs together and say these are salary ranges, and maybe people around this room know a lot better than I what the real salary range ought to be, and what the plans are for this program to reclassify some of those salaries. So if you get more fee money, but you still give somebody maybe a 1% raise every other year, that's not going to fix the problem.
Right.
And so why are we just going to increase fees when there's a broken system in place that needs to be fixed, where you guys can get some compensation and not have 8 or 9 vacancies in your permitting writing section at all times. And maybe you're going to come back and tell me there's no way to do it under the current state law. I don't really know, but I would like to understand that better and to know what your guys' plan is going to be, or propose a plan. One thing that I've heard is that under the new law last year or so, that you can give certain employees who have done something extraordinary, and I don't know what the words are.
I have no idea how much.
A one-time, 1 year,
Right.
I'll call it a bonus. I don't know what you call it, but, still that's a nice thing for some of your staff. But that's still not a fix.
Right.
I think you got the root of the problem is these classifications, which I think it is. And I would like your guys to talk about that and to talk about whether or not if we agree to any fee increases, is it going to do any good, other than just maintain the status quo, which really isn't acceptable.
So thank you for your support. We should all give you a round of applause. I will say that right now is an exciting time to be a state employee, not only because of the 3% and the 2% raises. Some of what you're talking about is work that's ongoing at a statewide level. I'm going to mess up the acronym, the C3 classification, compensation, career path is looking statewide at this classification issue that you brought up. And we can bring you information on what we do and how we do it. But I do expect in the next several months there to be changes statewide. And then to your other point, the above and beyond is the 1% that you mentioned. And that's the piece that, the governor has recommended, and it will be up to the state legislature, which again, we don't get GR, so it will be up to us to ultimately fund. But yeah, we need to be able to compensate people appropriately so that we don't have folks coming and going, because I think we can all agree that a well-trained person that's knowledgeable is going to help you get your permit faster, and it's going to be able to help you. So, but I don't have a lot of detail on the statewide effort.
I would add to that. So if you go to the projection of the pay plan slide, everything you've talked about, Robert, we did include in our projection. So we consider the cost of living increases that we're starting to get that we didn't for 15 to 20 years. We also, market adjustments are starting to be done. You're right, we are, as state employees, under a classification system that is kind of governed by our Office of Administration. So as a department, as a division, we are slightly restricted on what we can do for our employees unless it fits into the path of what OA is proposing. But as Darcy said, it is, in my 20-plus years here, this is the most I've seen of any administration doing anything for state employees to try and retain them. And it does include this above and beyond. That is the program that you're referencing. It is not bonuses, because those technically are not allowed by statute. But it is a pay adjustment that is temporary, based on performance expectations and evaluations that we do as managers. So we are starting to just get into that. We do recognize that, and Ed and I have, and with the program's help, have been doing numbers on how much it costs to train a new employee, and retention of good quality employees is very important. And it makes our numbers impactful, because if we don't have to spend personal service dollars training new staff every 6 months to 2 years, then we can pay the staff that are staying here more and possibly have less employees if we have more experienced staff. That is our goal. We're working on that. We've got a lot of issues that we're working on, and it's very baby steps, and it does take some time because we do have to work within the parameters of the Office of Administration as well. But we recognize that too. But the flip side of that is, because our department does not get general revenue, any increase that happens, whether it's a market-based salary done by an outside consultant, which is what we had this year, we were told, give these employees raises. and then we have to come up for the funding for that. We don't get general revenue for that, and so that's part of this calculation here, factors all of that in. We were conservative. We talked about much higher numbers, but it wasn't realistic, and we wanted to come to you with a realistic proposal. So this is where, as a department, we have ended up across all our media projecting what all of those things for employees will cost us. Does that help? And we will still try and put together some numbers from this program, but.
Are you going to share the study on the salaries that you?
The market-based study is available on the internet. It is rather detailed, but we've had employees dig through it, so I know there's a lot of information there.
Yeah, it's available on OA's personnel's website.
Okay.
Yeah, we can certainly probably.
And just real quick, not to go too much into that, but it was an independent consultant that evaluated our employees at a statewide level, picked certain classifications to give salary ranges to, and then we were given the salary range to put them at. It didn't necessarily make sense to someone who didn't participate in the study or the consultant work, but for example, engineers were not even included in the market-based study that was done this year. We understand a new study is coming. So all of that information is on OA's website. There is a lot. So we can try and boil that down for you. We can bring the classifications that the department is affected, or we can at least post that with the presentations. I'm seeing some shaking heads. No more data.
No, that'd be fine to bring about. I just want to share, I agree with Robert's assessment. You know, I mean, we've known this for years. We've been saying it for years. Same rationale that, if you have good employees that are happy and stay longer, it's better for everybody, you know, but also that it's nice to have some kind of a merit system, whatever you call it, or reward system, so you have some flexibility about, you know, about those decisions. I think you've done about the best you can on trying to calculate this into a fee structure. I don't know if you put more money in for what you hope to be increased, you know, pay, who's to say it's going to happen, you know, and just kind of bumps up all the numbers. I don't know. But you've adjusted for it for those stuff until, what, 24, I guess. So I don't know what else you're doing, but so we paid somebody a lot of money to tell us what we already know. Is that what you said?
The Office of Administration hired a consultant.
Gee, we're not very gracious on salaries in this state, are we? Yeah, I do have another question. I don't know. I don't want to be too flip on this one either, although I tend to be that way today. I don't know why. And this just disturbs me. It disturbs me, and I don't know if there's anything you can do about it. But it strikes me that this whole process can be for nothing. We can spend a lot of time talking about, you know, what we need to sustain the program. And we have apparently a system in which, you know, a couple of unhappy people can derail it. You know, if you get a high-powered lobbyist, it's even easier to derail it. I don't know what I'm asking here, except that, if, you know, if you see that, I don't know how you deal with it. I'd like to not waste our time, our members' time. You know, we have a lot of people in our membership that pay the majority of these emissions fees. And God forbid one of them is not the person I'm talking about. But it doesn't even have to be a large fee there. I mean, if somebody comes out of the blue, the way this system is structured, and, you know, get the voiceover in the General Assembly, all of a sudden you're backpedaling instead of trying to figure this out. And I'll stop there.
Roger, you stole my comment. But
I got it from you over lunch.
You can't possibly have an answer for this, because I don't think any of us saw this coming, but I echo his concern. Right. I want personally, and I think BASF wants personally to see a well-funded air program, state of Missouri. We want the same for the waste program. We want the same for the water program. And yet, we spent a fair amount of time on the waste program. For what? It seems like we're back to square one. I don't know if you guys can anticipate that. You can head it off at the pass. Sure be nice if you could. And what your plans are to do that, that's up to you. But it's a concern. We're about to spend some time trying to come up with a sensible structure, and it can be all for nothing, or it gets that impression. So just a concern.
Unless Ed wants to come up to a mic, Ed. Yes, you need a microphone.
I've been in this agency since 1991 off and on, and I've been involved in 10 different efforts to adjust our fees, raise our fees. The processes change, but the difficulty never really does. And we will get through this on the air side, we will get through this on the water side, we will get through this on the waste side. It never has been easy, and it will never be easy, but at the end of the day, I'm confident that the right thing will happen. You know, cooler heads will prevail. Nobody wants to see the programs revert to EPA. I mean, that's the universal sentiment. Now, when I start hearing that, I might start questioning whether we're going to get through this. But for now, I just ask everybody to be patient and persevering, because that's the only thing that's going to get this done. So.
And many of you know this, but this statute that allows us to go through this process is fairly new. It came about in 2013 timeframe. And Rich Germinder, our current legislative liaison, was very instrumental in helping with this wording when he worked for a senator. And one of the things that I was struggling with as the waste fees were getting challenged is because of term limits, the last time we went through fee stakeholder processes, most of the senators and reps were aware of this statute because they passed it. Now, 5, 6 years later, we have a lot of new reps and senators that initially thought we were trying to hide something from them because we were going through a process, because they weren't aware of the statute. So it's an educational process on our part. Rich Germinder has been, I'm not sure he's sleeping right now. He's the department's legislative director, and he is personally carrying this message. This is what the statute says, and we are working with our stakeholders. So we're doing what we can, and we know you are also doing what you can, because the legislators do tend to listen to industry more than state employees. I'll just stop right there.
Morgan? So just to put something in perspective, let's stay on this slide. I have in my notes that in a couple of years, the average shortfall is about 4.2 million. Okay. To put that in perspective, so 3% on 21, and let's add another percent for 21 for your fringe benefits. What is that going to cost the AIR program? And I guess, and I know it's probably a tough question for you guys to answer because of the numbers and the financials. Yeah. But I guess the broader perspective is, my question is of this 4.2 million shortfall, what percentage is a factor being driven by the pay plan, which I feel that you guys deserve. I'm not trying to dig on that, but I'm just, is it 80%, 60, 20? What's the dollar amount that's driving the 4.2 million?
I'm looking at our budget.
She doesn't want to even take a guess. I don't blame her.
They don't work in estimates. If you work with accountants much, they don't like estimates.
Yeah, well, I think we'd have to hit that a little further. And I know we've talked a little bit about, or more so about the pay plan, but yes, we do have a 1% annual growth on our fringe rates. So that's like our health insurance, retirement, that kind of stuff as well. And all of these percentage increases are built into the 4.2 5-year shortfall amount. And so we did want to cap the fringe rate at 62%, just because we felt that going higher than that, I mean, at some point, state employees are going to have to be paying more out of pocket for their insurance and things like that. So we just did feel that we had to cap it at some percentage rate.
But your question is, of the 4.2, how much is going to that, and how much is just because the revenues are, and we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think it paints a picture, because it's obviously a factor, probably on your guys' side. But, you know, again, I mean, if the 4.2 million, if 90% of it is because of the government's pay plan, which you guys didn't recommend, you guys didn't do, then I mean, it's not a whole lot to discuss. But if it's 20%, then, you know, I'd kind of be interested to see, you know, what's driving that 4.2? Is it the reduction of Title V? You know, on Title V, is the pay plan is a little bit of everything. I just kind of like to see a breakdown of percentages of what's driving that.
Yep, that's a good question. We'll get some detail on that.
Any other question? You know, you had a slide earlier about how the permit review fee went from $50 to $75 an hour.
Right.
Do you guys have an analysis of whether or not that fee is covering the cost of those employees?
Last time, when we went through this fee, I went through a lot of numbers trying to figure out fees to make permits pay for itself, and it was a non-starter for everybody on emission fees and filing fees. So we could dig the number back out, but it was, no one wanted anything to do with that on the permitting fees last time.
I don't understand what you're saying, Kendall.
If you took,
like for example, if there's 20 permit writing staff and they all charge their $75 an hour, you know how much that is at the end of the fiscal year, and you can add up their salaries, and so you can do this, can't you? Or maybe I just don't, I don't understand what you're saying.
well, permitting fees, we collect filing fees on construction, review fees, hourly review fees in construction, and filing fee on operating permit. If you took just the salaries of the permit writers, operating construction, and based on the number of projects, what would the filing fee need to be? Part of the problem on that is construction permit applications, we don't know what's coming in. I mean, it can be a low year. I mean, it can vary by 100 projects or more a year, just based on the economy and what everybody's doing. The only steady that we somewhat know is operating permits, how many people should be getting an operating permit. So, I mean, in looking at trying to adjust fees the last time, what would a filing fee on an operating permit need to be in order to offset the salaries of the permit writers? It was high enough that people didn't want to start with that. I mean, we can get that back out.
If I remember correctly, we also talked about a lot of the things that you do that isn't related to an actual project, so compliance assistance and, you know, just spitballing and talking through things with people that's not attached to a project, and so that's not something we collect a fee for. I think we talked about that quite a bit last time.
And Robert, I may not be interpreting your question correctly, but if you take a permit writer, I think we did the analysis of this last time too, but a very small percentage of that person's time is actually billable hours, if you're talking consultant speak. So the permit writer doesn't come in the morning and bill like an attorney might every 15 minutes of his or her time to a project. We could start doing that. I agree with Kendall, that's a non-starter. We are getting constant pushback when we have a new permit writer and someone is used to a previous permit writer and their permit is usually $400, and then all of a sudden they get a bill for $1,000, and it's because they have a new permit writer and it's taking a little longer. So it's hard to quantify the number of dollars that we would need, I guess. I mean, we could start billing for everything a permit writer did. I don't think most people in this room would like that, but that is an option we could consider. But we did have some slides 5 years ago about the percentage of a permit writer's time that is billed. It was pretty small, maybe 20%.
I mean, keep in mind, that's only construction permit writers that are billing a review fee. Operating permit is not there's no hourly review fee on the operating permits. I mean, in trying to assess staff and things, if they're pushing 40% time working on actual projects, I consider that probably they're doing what they should be, which would be kind of concept of billable hours. hours. I mean, in my mind, supervising it, I would say roughly 40% would be billable hours, and that would be on a good day, a non-new person.
Well, some of that's dependent on the facility too. I mean, how much information they have prepared in advance for you. You know, it varies, I assume, among the construction permit applications. So it might take somebody more time because there's some facilities on the circumstance.
There's a lot of factors that go into that, yes.
I don't know how you keep track of it.
I have a question, kind of follow up to that, has related to the schedule. So our next meetings are April the 6th and May the 5th. And one of the things I think you said about unknowns is what's going to happen with the vehicle inspection program.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, do we want to wait a little bit to have the next meeting until we know what's going to happen with the vehicle inspection program, or will we know by the 6th of April?
So I feel like we have enough homework that we have things that you could be looking at and considering as the session continues. The changes based on Jefferson and Franklin County being removed from GVIP are in the future. I don't know when EPA will act on that. Certainly by the end of the session, we'll know what, if anything, changed in this legislative session. So, I mean, I think we want to put it back to you all. We don't want to waste your time, but we also don't want to wait until the very last minute and then ask everybody very, very nicely to make a really quick decision. So I think we would recommend that we go ahead and have at least maybe one of those meetings, but again, it's your all's time. We need your help with this, and we want to make it so that it's something that you're able to do and participate in.
If you think it's worth it, we'll be here. I don't mean that. I'm just asking if that looks to me like a major question mark in the funding system overall, and so that's why I'm asking that question.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jay. I appreciate that. My take on that is the current legislation that's proposed it proposes to eliminate it from St. Charles. That leaves St. Louis City and St. Louis County, which St. Charles is a pretty big area of inspections. I don't know the breakdown, but there would still be some significant revenue from St. Louis City and St. Louis County. So as the legislation is currently proposed, it would not eliminate that fund, that $2 million. It would just reduce it. We do have some staff reductions in that area that we can manage that with. I think it would be my preference, I echo what Darcy says, is I think there's enough work and some more information we can provide you before the end of the legislative session, so we keep on track and on our schedule to file something by December 1st, that it would benefit us to continue the discussion. And we would have some updates from Rich Germander on that legislation as well.
I can ask a follow-up on that. I know the great state of Missouri is a sovereign entity. Doesn't EPA have something to say about
this
as well?
Yeah, certainly. So, you know, as part of the state implementation plan, any changes, we have to be able to demonstrate that there wouldn't be a backsliding of air quality, and so that is definitely something we're ensuring that Rich is aware of. St. Charles is actually the location of the violating monitor for the St. Louis non-attainment area. Will shaking his head. So, I mean, we need to be very thoughtful and ensure that we're keeping people educated on what that would mean. So, yep, good point.
Yeah, the legislation doesn't mean that it stops there, because we do still have to work with EPA. So, and we've been trying to educate the senators and reps on that as well. So.
You're saying you have to have rulemaking.
Yes. More importantly, we'd have to have it approved into the state implementation plan. If EPA approved our SIP, for example, Darcy referenced that we have proposed to remove it from Jefferson and Franklin, and we have submitted the state implementation plan amendment to remove that. We have not done the rule. If EPA approves the SIP, we will work to amend the rule, but most likely we would still allow the removal of that prior to the rule change. It's not our normal process, but yes, we would still have to amend the rule. In this case, the state implementation plan would be the overarching authority.
Right.
That's the word I'm looking for.
I know we're coming up on 3 o'clock, which I thought was when you wanted to wrap up. Did you have something to throw out there? I see you smiling, assuming you
Well, I
did.
have more slides.
Okay,
Yeah.
no, as far as, okay, here's some things you can maybe think about between now and the next meeting as to what can be
Right.
adjusted.
So, right, I mean, I think most of us are fine to continue past 3, but you guys may have a drive, and you may have other things that you want to get done. So thank you for the segue. We plan to do in the audience, too. So here's the reminder slide that I think I mentioned that we had. Just before we really look at, more details, just a reminder, based upon the data that we have, we're projecting about, and this is my little approximation here, about $4 million average shortfall beginning in fiscal year 23. That's the cliff, as we so lovingly refer to it. Reminder, admission fee is our largest projected discrepancy based upon our best estimate of where we're going to be. EPA's fee is currently $52.03 per ton. It's reevaluated annually. We don't know where it will go, but it is evaluated on an annual basis. We're looking at permit and asbestos fees and saying that we don't have a handle necessarily on asbestos activities in the future because it is a demand activity. It's something that, industry guides how many projects there are and guides how many people want to be certified and how many training providers and such. Same with with the permit fees. Not everybody has realized the new fees. And with the changes, basic operating permits going away, it's difficult for us to project as facilities move through the permitting process. We can talk about it all day long. We've got some homework on that to provide some additional information. We've talked about it's challenging to compare to other states. We do know that Iowa and Nebraska and Kansas are set up somewhat similar to us. So we set up some scenarios. We've got a really fancy calculator. We probably won't get into today, but we have it for folks. We want to make sure everybody knows this is not a proposal. This is discussions. We're just talking about things and ways that we can look at long-term viability. Everything will be available. Do you like how I've got like 4 slides of disclaimers before I even say anything? So the things that we would say likely would stay the same. I'm going to buzz through this, but, looking at the same pollutants, keeping due dates. We've already talked about why that June 1st submittal date is critical. Keeping the 1-ton minimum fee, keeping those other things that are set by statute. Here's a reminder that local agencies, those of you that submit fees to local agencies, that actually is deducted from our fees. It's about $100,000 for emission year 2018 collected last year. Again, you've seen this slide before. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Just, we've done homework, but you guys know how other states implement or things that you think that other states implement that we might want to take over. We're open to figuring out what we can do within our statutory authority. So here's the guts. If we look at just changing the fee per ton, looking at it at being $48 per ton now, looking at 2018 emission levels, about 140,000 chargeable tons, at $48, it's about $6.7 million. And again, local agency fees were about $97. If you do the math and you take $4 million-ish and you divide it by the amount that we think we're going to get, the emission fee would be approximately about $80 per ton. I don't know how that compares with what you walked in the room thinking. Maybe you walked in the room thinking we were going to tell you we needed $200. I don't know. Maybe you walked in thinking EPA's fee would be a reasonable place to land. So I'm flashing this up here. I'm looking in case anybody's walking out on me here, but this is just doing the math based upon the best projections that we have for future revenues, future expenditures. But so if we were to look at EPA's rate, which is $52.03, which is less than $80, if you were to look at the same CAP, same chargeable pollutants, and look at what $52.03 would do, I'm not going to pull a calculator up right now, but we can. It doesn't really change much for us. It doesn't change much because of the projected expenditures and the projected number of emissions that will be paid for in coming years. It doesn't really change too much for us. But what we do know, again, EPA raises it every year based on the Consumer Price Index. We're not economists, but we just did a linear interpolation. I had to practice that word for you. We did a linear interpolation to determine where we think, in our best estimate, EPA is going to go, just for information. We also ran our handy-dandy calculator on, say, $60, because that's where we think EPA may end up here in this time frame that we're talking about. $60 does change the annual 5-year average projection shortfall from about the 4 million down to about 2.7 million. So this is just information. Many times whenever I've talked with those, you guys individually or had hallway conversations before or after commission meetings, people say, oh, well, maybe we could look at EPA. So this is just us putting into the calculator using the ins and outs that we are estimating with our best estimates and giving you some information. I think I have 2 more these scenarios. Another scenario would be looking at the cap. Again, as Kira mentioned, there's not a lot of people that hit, I think you mentioned-ish, there's not a lot of people that hit the cap, so changing the cap isn't going to affect everybody. It's going to affect those that are already bumping up against it. Again, using the mathematical calculation, using our best estimate and projections of revenues and expenditures to make a difference. For $4 million, the cap would need to be about 27,000 tons per pollutant with no facility total cap. I'm going really fast. You guys are welcome to interrupt me and just don't punch me, but you can ask me any questions that you have. I'm far enough away that you may not be able to hit me. So that's looking at a cap. We've also, Stacy's tool is stellar and has lots of different ways to look at this. Another way we just looked at it for discussion purposes is modifying a cap and an emission fee. And so you can see the results here on the slide. These are all just things that we've heard that people, we've looked at, again, other states, we've looked at EPA. These are just points for discussion. We need your help to figure out what makes sense. We need your help knowing if our projected revenues are right. I mean, if there could be things that we don't know, new industry, as someone mentioned on the phone, there could be changes in your industry. You know, the statute does outline what and how we move through this process, but we got to get there together. So the slide says questions, but I would take input, feedback, ideas, concerns, ballpark. Yes.
Calculator will be online, right?
Well, that is my question, if we can post it online because it's in Excel, or if we would have to provide it by email. I'm not sure if we can post it in a live web.
So the old...
Yes, get it to you, yes.
Yeah, the previous tool is still on our website from the 2014-2015 fee discussions as in Excel.
Okay.
So I think we can do the same.
You think we can?
But I just need to double, triple check with everybody because it's got a lot more data in it, because to be able to change pollutant caps and per pollutant fees, you have to do a lot more. So there's a lot more data in there. So it's a little bit different tool.
That $80 shut you up fast, didn't it?
Let it flow in. Have it on the slide.
I cautioned her to say, this is what the calculator, the math does. That's not what we're asking for.
Well, we need a new calculator. Apparently not working.
We do fully expect to be somewhere between 48 and 80, so that's...
It's the math.
Yeah.
Math.
Well, not then on a sour note, I mean, because that was a little shocking. But I'll repeat what we've been saying from day one in rig firm is that we want a program that works for the state.
Right.
We don't want to go back Well, I'm rethinking that right now. I'm just kidding. We seriously always support the program, so we'll in good faith roll for sleeves and, and all the other members of our group and non-members, we'll, it is what it is,
Right.
I will add this for those of you who maybe haven't had to interact much. We have had a very good working relationship with the AIR program. They have been very responsive when we need permits, and I'm looking forward to that in the future because we have several more coming. I echo Roger's words. We would much rather deal with the state AIR program that is responsive and also looks out for Missouri.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that as well. We've had a great relationship on the utility side. Unfortunately, as the utility industry, as we see more and more wind coming on out in western Kansas and so forth, I think you'll see some utility emissions dropping coming up in the future.
Right.
And we're adding wind and solar resources as well.
The other thing is, given those kind of changes of circumstance, isn't it right for a discussion of a higher level on the, and whoever does planning for the state of Missouri, if anyone, how do you fund these programs? This is, it's starting to look a little archaic as to how we even fund the AIR program. And you could say that about lots of things. But, the world's changing, and we, when they have to change with it. It seemed like a great idea 40 years ago.
Right. And I don't know if anyone in this room was involved in it, but in the early 2000s, the AIR advisory program undertook a research project, if you will, to try and see where we could get additional fees, somewhat related to air pollution. And at the time, they focused, it was Jack Barsanti and Missy Hart, focused on automobiles and how we could put more fees on automobiles because that's where a big chunk of the air emissions were. We bumped up against a lot of constitutional issues because a lot of the fees related to automobiles and gasoline are directed constitutionally to MoDOT. And so those discussions kind of died at that time, but it is a bigger picture question. So, and I don't know if we can solve it in the 8 months we have to do a rule change now, but it is something that obviously needs to be looked at and discussed on how do we fund things like this in the future. So we did try and find some of that data, and it's not in my files anymore, so Jack Barsanti took it with him, so I'm not sure that we have any of that information, but that's what I remember.
I probably have some of that. I don't know how relevant it would be, but I remember the discussion pretty well.
Right.
And I know, and we came to basically the conclusion that there's not much of it that the AIR advisory group could do.
Right.
Except make a few recommendations. It's a legislative question.
Yes. Right.
And, and now we have term limits and people on fast tracks, and they don't really pay a lot of attention to these kind of issues or want to, so it's going to be a little daunting. And it's going to have to come to the executive branch, really, I think.
Other questions or ideas or homework for us? We've got a list, but other things? Stacey, anyone on the phone?
Nope, no more questions.
WebEx? That's me. You can catch me online, over the phone, at meetings. You can catch any of us, really, but I threw myself on the rails here on this slide. But we want to figure out together how to get here, because we all need to have this discussion, as hard as it may be. But again, recognizing timing and obligations that you all have in other media. We appreciate all the time that you've spent with us so far, the questions you've had. Anything else?
I'm glad you didn't lead with that slide.
That one? Contact us?
I think this,
we have learned a thing or two over the years, Roger. Right. We didn't want everyone to leave then, so you had to stay with us.
Right.
Thank you so much. We've said it again, you know, I mean, Kurt said it, I mean, you know, of all the program areas, I don't mean any offense to any of the program areas, I mean, the air program, last 15 years has been fundamentally sound, solid, good group to work with, and we appreciate that. I can't say that enough. Sure.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Yep.
Could you put the website up?
For the, yes. Where it'll be? I don't think I have it. Stacy, will you have?
Oh, I think it's at the beginning of the presentation.
Yes, it's very early.
If you somehow lose where you write it down, the easiest way is to go to dnr.mo.gov. And then it brings up a banner of all our programs, and AIR is first because of the alphabet. So if you click on that and then go to the AIR Advisory Work Group, that's where all the presentations are posted under that. So while she's getting to that, that's the easy way to step through.
It's at the top here.
Yeah. Or if you can't find it, give any one of us a call, an email, and we can send you the link.
Yep. And one of the main ways we've been communicating is using the Gov delivery. And so if you're not on the list, but you've got the information secondhand, I can add you to the list. You can add yourself, but I'm happy to add you.
Yes, the meeting Air Program Advisory Forum.
Stakeholder, the Hazardous Stakeholder, had a listing of facilities, the waste, and do you have something similar for the Title V facilities and, you know, the ones that are capped and those that are not? Do you have anything like that?
Have that information.
Will that be available?
It would be calculator.
Okay.
China Blue. Yeah. It's in the fee calculator. As Stacey was mentioning, the calculator has a lot of data in it in order to be able to.
Okay.
Doing the around the room stare in case anybody has questions or anything they want to say before we wrap up. We went a little over, but hopefully not so much that it impacts your travel plans or anything. We really appreciate your time. Good questions. Good homework for us. Anybody on the phone? Okay. No. All right. Well, thank you very much. Stay tuned for a notification of the next meeting.
Chat. I'm going to hit tell them. Hang on, I have to do my recorder here. Dang it. Right here. Yeah.